Emma had always loved her job at the retirement home. She found great joy in helping the elderly residents, making sure they felt cared for, listened to, and respected. Every day was different, and Emma enjoyed the challenge of brightening someone's day. She had a natural gift for making people smile, and the elderly residents appreciated her kind nature. One chilly afternoon, a new resident arrived at the retirement home. His name was Mr. Thompson, and he was in his late 80s. He looked like an old man who had lived a full life, with gray hair and a slow, measured walk. But his eyes, bright and sharp, suggested there was more to him than just his age. He carried with him a quiet sadness, a kind of weight that no one could quite place. Emma made it a point to welcome him, as she did with all the new residents. She introduced herself with a warm smile and made sure he felt comfortable in his new room. Mr. Thompson didn't say much at first. He seemed distant, lost in his own thoughts. Emma could see that he had a lot on his mind, but she didn't push him. She believed in letting people open up when they were ready, and sometimes all it took was a little patience and a friendly face. Over the next few weeks, Emma would often stop by Mr. Thompson's room during her shifts. She'd chat with him about simple things, how his day was going, if he needed anything, or if he had any stories from his past that he wanted to share. At first, Mr. Thompson wasn't too talkative. He would answer her questions politely, but kept his responses short. But Emma noticed that his eyes softened when she asked about his family, and sometimes, just for a brief moment, a flicker of something deeper would show in his expression. It was almost as if there was a story he was holding back, one that he wanted to tell but wasn't sure if he could. One afternoon, as Emma was bringing him his lunch, she saw him staring out the window, looking out at the gray sky. She could tell something was bothering him. He hadn't said much that day, but there was an air of sadness that hung around him. Taking the seat beside him, Emma casually asked, "You've got that faraway look again, Mr. Thompson. What's on your mind today?" For a long moment, he didn't say anything. But then, as if he had made up his mind, he spoke in a quiet voice. "You know, I've often wondered what happened to my family. They were once so important, so proud of everything we had. And now, nothing remains." His voice cracked slightly as he spoke, and Emma felt her heart tighten. She had no idea what he meant, but the sadness in his tone told her this wasn't a simple tale. "What do you mean?" Emma asked softly, trying to draw him out without pushing too hard. "What happened to your family?" Mr. Thompson took a deep breath and turned his gaze back to the window. "My great-grandfather built something great, something that helped a lot of people. But over the years, it all faded away. The business, the land, everything. Now there's just me, and I don't know what to do about it." His voice was filled with regret, as though the loss of his family's legacy weighed heavily on him. Emma could see that this wasn't just a simple matter of nostalgia. It was a deep personal pain. She felt a sense of curiosity rising within her. There was more to Mr. Thompson's story than met the eye. She wanted to help, but she wasn't sure how. "I'm sorry to hear that," Emma said, her voice filled with empathy. "If you ever want to talk about it more, I'm here." Mr. Thompson nodded slowly, giving her a grateful look. Maybe I will," he murmured. In that moment, Emma made a silent promise to herself. She didn't know what exactly she could do, but she was determined to learn more about Mr. Thompson's family, his legacy, and what had caused it all to disappear. Something told her that his story wasn't finished yet, and maybe, just maybe, she could help him find a way to restore what had been lost. A few days later, Emma found herself thinking about Mr. Thompson more than usual. She couldn't help but wonder what he had meant by his family's lost legacy. She'd always been interested in stories of family histories and legacies, but she never imagined that one of her own residents would have such a story to tell. Every time she walked by his room, she saw the same sadness in his eyes, and it made her feel a deep sense of empathy for him. She knew she had to learn more. The next time Emma visited Mr. Thompson's room, she found him sitting in his favorite chair by the window. He was looking out, But this time, he seemed lost in thought, almost as if he hadn't noticed her approach. She gently knocked on the doorframe to get his attention, and he looked up with a start. "Oh, Emma, didn't see you there," he said, his voice soft but not unkind. "I brought you your tea," Emma said, holding up the cup. "How are you doing today?" Mr. Thompson gave a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm all right, just thinking a lot. I've been thinking about what I told you the other day." Emma sat down beside him, setting the tea down on the small table between them. "You know, you don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. But if you do, I'm happy to listen." There was a long pause as Mr. Thompson stared into his cup of tea, his fingers tracing the edge. Finally, he sighed and spoke again. "It's just hard to let go of what my family once had. My great-grandfather built an entire business from the ground up. It was something to be proud of, a legacy. But over the years, it all crumbled. There was a series of bad decisions, poor investments, and eventually, it all faded. My parents tried to rebuild, but they couldn't do it. And now, I'm here, in this retirement home, and my family's name is nothing more than a memory." Emma listened closely, her heart going out to him. She could hear the deep regret in his voice, but there was something else too, something Emma couldn't quite place. It was like he still believed there was a chance to restore what was lost, though he didn't know how. "Have you ever tried to find out what happened?" Emma asked, curious. Mr. Thompson looked at her, his eyes suddenly sharp. "I tried, but there's so much history, so many people involved, and most of the family is scattered or no longer interested in the past. It's like no one cares anymore. But I can't let go of it. There has to be something left, some piece of the legacy we can rebuild." Emma felt a spark of hope in her chest. Maybe there was something she could do after all. "I don't know much about your family's business, but I could help you look into it. I mean, I'm here every day, and I know how to find information. Maybe we can figure something out together." Mr. Thompson studied her for a moment, as if weighing her offer. "You'd really help me." "Of course," Emma said with a smile. "I believe everyone's story deserves to be remembered, even if it's a bit lost along the way. If there's something from your family's past that can be restored, maybe we can find it." For the first time since she'd met him, Mr. Thompson's face softened, and he gave a small nod. "I don't know where to start, but if you're willing to help, then maybe, just maybe, we can find a way." Emma's heart raced with excitement. She didn't know where this journey would lead, but she felt sure that helping Mr. Thompson rediscover his family's legacy could turn into something meaningful. This wasn't just about finding old documents or dusty records. It was about bringing hope to someone who had lost everything. And in that moment, Emma knew she couldn't turn back. She was determined to help Mr. Thompson find what was left of his family's legacy, no matter how difficult the path ahead might be. The next morning, Emma wasted no time. She woke up early, eager to get started on helping Mr. Thompson. She had a feeling that this might be something bigger than she expected. There was no telling what she might uncover, but one thing was clear. Mr. Thompson's story was important, and she was determined to help him find the answers he was searching for. After her shift started at the retirement home, Emma took a few minutes to organize her thoughts. She sat at her desk and started making a list of possible places to look for information. There had to be records, maybe some family archives or old business documents somewhere. She even considered reaching out to local libraries or historical societies that might have records of the old business her family had run. She knew that the task ahead of her wouldn't be easy, but she was excited about the challenge. She decided to start with the basics. The next time she visited Mr. Thompson's room, she would ask him for any details he could remember, names, places, anything that could help her start digging. She had a feeling that the more Mr. Thompson talked, the clearer the story would become. When the time came, Emma walked into Mr. Thompson's room with a notebook in hand. He was sitting in his chair, as usual, looking out the window. This time, however, his eyes weren't filled with sadness. There was a spark of something new. A glimmer of hope, maybe. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," Emma said brightly as she sat down beside him. "I've been thinking about how we can start looking into your family's history." Mr. Thompson turned to her, his face softening with appreciation. "You've really made up your mind to help, haven't you?" he said with a small smile. Emma nodded. "I'm ready. I've been doing some thinking, and I want to know more about your family's business. Any details you remember might be a good place to start." For a moment, Mr. Thompson looked away, his expression distant. But then, as if something clicked in his mind, he spoke. "Well, I remember my great-grandfather's name, Samuel Thompson. He started a company that built ships. Big, sturdy ships that sailed across the oceans. My parents used to talk about it all the time when I was young. He was proud of what he had built." Emma quickly scribbled down the name. Samuel Thompson. She looked up at Mr. Thompson, encouraging him to continue. "What kind of ships did he build? Were they for business or something else?" Mr. Thompson's eyes brightened as he spoke. "Oh, they were for trade. They traveled all over the world, bringing goods from one country to another. It wasn't just a business. It was a family affair. Everyone worked together, and the company grew. My great-grandfather was a visionary, always thinking of new ways to expand the business." Emma's excitement grew as she wrote down every word. This was exactly the kind of information she needed to get started. "Do you remember any specific places where the ships were built or traded?" Mr. Thompson nodded slowly. The main shipyard was in a small town along the coast. It was a busy place. People came from all over to see the ships being built. It was famous for its quality, and the name Thompson Shipyards was well known. Emma's mind raced with possibilities. "That's a great lead. I'm sure there are records of the shipyard somewhere, maybe in the town or at a local archive." She continued asking him questions, and the more he spoke, the more pieces of the puzzle she began to collect. As Mr. Thompson shared stories of the family business and the people who had worked there, Emma started to feel like she was uncovering something truly special. She wasn't just learning about a business. It was a legacy, a story of hard work, success, and ultimately, loss. As she left Mr. Thompson's room that day, Emma's mind was buzzing with excitement. She had so many ideas for where to look next. The journey ahead was still unclear, but one thing was certain. Emma was more determined than ever to help Mr. Thompson reclaim his family's lost legacy. She was starting to realize that this wasn't just a simple task. It was an opportunity to make a real difference in someone's life. Emma spent the next few days diving into her research. She started with the small coastal town where the Thompson shipyards had once been located. It wasn't far from the city, and she figured a visit to the town might bring more answers than just searching through old records. She gathered her notes, packed a bag with a few essentials, and set out to see what she could find. The town was quiet, nestled along the shoreline with a few fishing boats bobbing gently in the water. It seemed like the kind of place where time moved slowly, where the memories of the past hung in the air like the scent of the sea breeze. As Emma walked through the streets, she could almost imagine the bustle of the shipyard years ago. People working, ships being built, goods being loaded and unloaded. Her first stop was the local library. She hoped there might be old newspaper articles or photos that could give her more insight into the Thompson family business. The librarian, a kind woman named Mrs. Parker, was more than happy to help. She led Emma to the archives, where rows of dusty files and old books lined the shelves. Emma carefully began sifting through the papers, finding articles about the shipyard's peak years. There were stories of the company's success, the ships they built, and the people who worked there. She found mention of Samuel Thompson's leadership, how he had turned the shipyard into one of the most respected businesses in the region. The more she read, the more she realized just how important this family had once been to the town's economy and history. But as Emma read on, she noticed something troubling. There were fewer articles as the years passed. The last mention of the shipyard was decades ago. The company had gradually faded from the town's records. Emma frowned. wondering what had happened to cause such a dramatic fall. Was it just bad business decisions, or was there something else that had caused the shipyard's downfall? "Excuse me, Mrs. Parker," Emma asked, looking up from the papers. "Do you remember anything about what happened to the shipyard after Samuel Thompson passed away?" Mrs. Parker thought for a moment, then shook her head. "I was just a child when that happened, but I remember hearing rumors. After Mr. Thompson died, things started changing. The company couldn't keep up with the competition. There were rumors of financial troubles, and then the workers began to leave. It was a sad time for the town." Emma's heart sank. She had suspected that there was more to the story than just bad business decisions. It seemed like the end of the Thompson shipyards had been a slow, painful decline. But there was still so much more she didn't know. What had happened to the people who had worked there? Where had they gone? And most importantly, what had happened to the legacy that Mr. Thompson still clung to? Determined to find out more, Emma asked Mrs. Parker if there were any old town records that might shed light on the shipyard's closure. Mrs. Parker smiled and led her to a small dusty box tucked away in the back of the archive room. "These old records might be just what you're looking for," she said. As Emma carefully flipped through the pages, she came across a letter that seemed to stand out. It was dated a few months after Samuel Thompson's death. The letter was from a business partner, and it spoke of an agreement to sell the shipyard's assets. Emma's fingers trembled as she read the words. Piecing together the story, it seemed that, after Mr. Thompson's death, the company had been sold off to pay debts, and everything had been lost in the process. Emma's mind raced. This was the missing piece she had been looking for. The shipyard had been sold, and with it, the legacy of the Thompson family. But what if there was something left behind? Something hidden in the sale or the assets? What if Mr. Thompson's family legacy wasn't entirely gone after all? Determined more than ever, Emma knew that this was just the beginning. She had uncovered the first real clue. Now, she had to go deeper. There was still so much to learn, and she was sure that with Mr. Thompson's help, they could bring his family's legacy back into the light. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity for Emma. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was getting closer to uncovering something big. After her visit to the library and the discovery of the letter about the sale of the shipyard, she knew that there were still many unanswered questions. What had happened to the assets of the shipyard? Who had bought it? And why hadn't anyone mentioned it before? Emma returned to the retirement home each day, eager to share her findings with Mr. Thompson. She knew the information she had uncovered was just the beginning, but it was enough to fuel her determination. She hoped that as they pieced together the details, they might uncover a hidden part of his family's story that had been lost to time. When she arrived at Mr. Thompson's room, she found him sitting by the window again, looking out at the bright afternoon sky. His eyes lit up when he saw her. "Did you find anything?" he asked, his voice full of curiosity. Emma sat down next to him, a wide smile on her face. "Yes, I found something important, Mr. Thompson. It looks like the shipyard was sold off after your great-grandfather passed away. The company's assets were sold to pay off debts, but there's still a lot we don't know." Mr. Thompson's face darkened, his hands trembling slightly. "So, it's true. Everything was lost. My family's hard work, gone." Emma reached out, gently placing a hand on his arm. "Not necessarily, Mr. Thompson. There could still be something left. I found a letter that mentions the sale, but it doesn't tell us everything. There might be records or documents hidden somewhere, something that can show us what really happened." His eyes softened, and for the first time in days, he seemed to hold on to a shred of hope. "You really think so?" "I do," Emma replied with confidence. "We just need to keep looking. I believe there's a piece of this puzzle we haven't found yet." The next step was clear. Emma needed to find out who had bought the shipyard. If she could track down the buyer, maybe there would be a chance to recover something from the sale. She spent the next few days reaching out to anyone who might know about the shipyard's final years. She contacted old business owners, former workers, and even local historians. Everyone she spoke to had heard rumors about the shipyard's closure, but no one seemed to know the full story. Her breakthrough came when she spoke to an older man named Mr. Harris. He had been a young clerk at the time of the sale and remembered handling the paperwork. The shipyard didn't go to just anyone, he told Emma. It was bought by a man named Edward Miller. He came into town one day with a plan to turn the shipyard into a different kind of business. But things went downhill quickly, and he left shortly after. The shipyard was never the same. Emma's heart raced. Edward Miller. That name was new to her, but it felt like the missing link. She quickly asked Mr. Harris if he knew where she could find Miller or any records related to the purchase. "I don't know where he went, but his company was registered in the city," Mr. Harris replied. "You might find some old records at the city hall. They keep records of business transactions." Emma thanked him and hurried to the city hall, her excitement growing. This could be the lead she needed. After some searching, she found the old business transaction records buried in a dusty filing cabinet. As she flipped through the pages, she finally found it. Edward Miller had indeed bought the Thompson shipyard. The document showed the transaction in detail, including the amount he had paid. But there was more. At the bottom of the page, Emma spotted a small note. It was written in a familiar handwriting, one that made her heart skip a beat. The note read, "To the future of the Thompson legacy. May it continue in ways we cannot yet imagine." Emma stared at the words in disbelief. Who had written this note? And why had it been left there, attached to the official papers? This note felt like a message from the past that was meant for someone like her. The legacy wasn't truly gone. It was waiting to be uncovered. Emma now had a new sense of purpose. She was closer than ever to bringing the Thompson family's history back to life. The answers were out there, and she was determined to find them. With the note in her hands, Emma felt like she was holding a key to the mystery. The words, written so many years ago, seemed to speak directly to her. She could feel the weight of the message, and it gave her an energy she hadn't felt before. The legacy of the Thompson family was still out there, and she was closer than ever to finding it. But the question remained, who had written that note, and why? Emma knew that to find answers, she needed to track down Edward Miller. The name had been the key to unlocking so much of the mystery, but it still felt like an unfinished puzzle. The letter had mentioned the future of the Thompson legacy. Had Miller been the person who truly believed in it, or had he just wanted to profit from the sale? There were so many unanswered questions, and Emma knew she had to get to the bottom of it. She spent the next few days searching for any trace of Edward Miller. It wasn't easy. He had left the town shortly after buying the shipyard, and no one seemed to know where he had gone. The only clue she had was the company he had started in the city. Emma visited the city, determined to find anything that might lead her to Miller. She visited his old office, which was now a part of a different business, but the new owners had no idea where he had gone or what had happened to his company. But Emma didn't give up. She kept searching, visiting more offices, asking more questions. She even managed to track down a few people who had worked with Miller during his time in the town. They told her about his plans for the shipyard, how he had intended to turn it into a modern operation, but had quickly realized that the shipyard was too far gone. His business failed shortly after, and Miller disappeared without a trace. It seemed as though Edward Miller had become a ghost, vanishing from the records and from memory. But Emma wasn't ready to give up just yet. She remembered the note attached to the business transaction records. The handwriting looked familiar, and she had a feeling that it wasn't from Miller. It was too personal, too meaningful. Emma thought about who else might have had access to those papers at the time. Could it have been someone from the Thompson family? Someone who still cared about the legacy? Her search shifted once again. She began to visit the few remaining members of the Thompson family, hoping they could provide more information. She reached out to distant relatives who had stayed out of the public eye, some of whom had never returned to the town after the shipyard's closure. It was during one of these visits that she finally found someone who could help. Lily Thompson, a great-aunt of Samuel Thompson's, was the last remaining member of the family who had worked at the shipyard. She had been young when the company was sold, but she remembered enough to make Emma's heart race. She told Emma that after Samuel's death, the family had tried to keep the shipyard afloat for as long as possible. But as debts mounted and the business struggled, they had to make a difficult decision. They had decided to sell the company to Edward Miller, hoping he could turn things around. But they had also included a clause in the agreement. Miller was not allowed to sell the shipyard's legacy. He had to ensure that the family's name and history were preserved, no matter what happened to the business itself. Lily paused and looked at Emma with a knowing expression. "That note you found," she said softly, "it wasn't from Miller. It was from my grandfather, Samuel Thompson. He wrote it as a last wish, hoping that the family's legacy would live on." Emma's heart skipped a beat. This was the breakthrough she had been searching for. The note had come from Samuel Thompson himself, and it was a message to future generations, to someone who would care about the legacy and see it through. Emma felt like she was being guided by the past, pushed forward by Samuel's wish. Lily continued, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "My grandfather always believed that the shipyard wasn't just a business. It was a symbol of what the family stood for: hard work, integrity, and a commitment to building something that would last. He wanted the legacy to survive, even if the shipyard couldn't. He knew the world was changing, and he wanted to make sure that the Thompson name would live on." With this new revelation, Emma felt more determined than ever to finish what she had started. The Thompson legacy wasn't just a family history. It was a story that needed to be told, a story that could inspire others. Emma was ready to uncover the full story, piece by piece, and bring the legacy back into the light. The final chapter of this journey was closer than ever. The final piece of the puzzle was within reach, and Emma could feel the weight of everything she had uncovered. She had tracked down the note from Samuel Thompson, learned about the clause that had been placed in the sale of the shipyard, and discovered the deep love and respect the Thompson family had for the legacy they had built. But there was still more to do. Emma wasn't just going to let this story fade into history. She was determined to honor the memory of the shipyard and the family that had poured everything into it. With Lily Thompson's help, Emma began to plan how to bring the Thompson family's legacy back to life. They decided to start by reaching out to the community, inviting former employees, local residents, and anyone with a connection to the shipyard to come together and share their stories. Emma had realized that the shipyard wasn't just a business. It had been a part of the community's fabric. People had grown up with it, worked alongside it, and watched it shape the town. The Thompson family's legacy wasn't only in the family. It was in every person who had ever been touched by the shipyard. They held the event at the old shipyard site, which had long since fallen into disrepair. The building stood as a shell of its former self, but it still carried the weight of history. Emma and Lily worked tirelessly to make the event special. They set up a small display of photographs, documents, and memorabilia from the shipyard's heyday. The community responded warmly. Former workers arrived, sharing their stories and memories, and it quickly became clear just how much the shipyard had meant to them. There was a man who had worked as an apprentice at the shipyard when he was young. He recalled how Samuel Thompson had mentored him, teaching him the skills that had allowed him to build a life for himself. There was a woman who had grown up near the shipyard and remembered how the workers had always helped her family when they needed it. As the stories poured in, Emma could see how deeply the Thompson family had touched everyone in the town. The legacy Samuel had left behind was stronger than Emma had even realized. The event was a huge success, and it quickly gained the attention of the local media. Emma had the idea to use the coverage to help raise awareness of the Thompson family's contribution to the town. They could use the publicity to bring attention to the possibility of preserving the remaining pieces of the shipyard's history. There was talk of restoring the building and turning it into a museum, a place where people could come and learn about the shipyard's impact on the community and the family who had built it. Soon after the event, Emma reached out to local officials, presenting the idea of preserving the shipyard's legacy. With the support of the town, and the stories she had gathered, she was able to gather enough backing to make it happen. The plans for a museum moved forward, and the community rallied behind the project. Emma had succeeded in her mission. Not only had she uncovered the history of the Thompson family, but she had also found a way to ensure it would never be forgotten. The museum was eventually built on the site of the old shipyard. It became a symbol of the strength and perseverance of the Thompson family, as well as the power of community and memory. People came from all over to visit, learning about the legacy of the family who had built the shipyard and the people who had worked there. Emma was proud of what she had accomplished. She had honored the memory of the Thompson family and brought their story back to life in a way that would be remembered for generations to come. As she stood in the museum, looking around at the photos and stories displayed on the walls, Emma couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. She had given the Thompson family the honor they deserved, and she had done it through hard work, determination, and a deep respect for their legacy. The story of the Thompson shipyard would never fade again. It would live on in the hearts of everyone who walked through the doors of the museum, and in the minds of the generations to come.